when I began focusing on this question as to why what we did at the local level wasn't, or the immediate impacts of what we're doing wasn't transferring into long-term sustainable change, it led me to think that there had to be a way of not just knowing the slice that you were working on of any of these very complex conflicts or complex societies, but a way to link your slice to the bigger picture. And what you really lacked, you learned, you were trained in a discipline. I mean, I was trained in the discipline of negotiation, mediation, facilitation, conflict, all sort of ways of dealing with conflict and building peace. You're trained to do that piece of it well, but you're not necessarily trained to think beyond that discipline and to link it to other disciplines. So some of the work that we did that was most impactful, I think had the longest, most sustainable impact, was work where we partnered with people who were in a different discipline. Maybe it was development, or it was human rights or something like that. And that's, from my practitioner days, were the ones that stuck with me. And I'm thinking, well, if it worked at crossing one boundary, what if you crossed multiple boundaries? And that's what led me into looking at systems thinking, because systems thinking is the science of wholeness. And so it's a way of seeing wholes and not just your piece of that whole, to see the forest, not just the tree that you're working on. And that's what led me to think there's got to be something there, that there's a contribution that systems thinking can make to the work that each of us is doing in our own sector. I remember a conversation I had with a development practitioner several years ago, and I said, what do you think is the next big issue? What's the thing you struggle with the most? And she said, well, it's this point about linking the micro to the macro. Like, we know we're supposed to do that, but we don't have a calculus. We don't have a way of figuring that out, of understanding that. And without that, we don't really have a way to work on it. So we just work on our piece. And that's where the looking to systems thinking, and one of my first sort of questions was, well, what are the three big drivers of systems change? 3 because it's a manageable number people can remember and get their hands around. And the more I looked, the more I found there wasn't a lot of work on sort of the 3 main drivers. There was work from the systems world, both on how to understand systems as systems, and also how to generically sort of intervene in a system to affect its development. And that was very helpful, but it didn't really come down to sort of substantively where should I be looking to make big systems change? What are the 3 most important levers that I can pull? And that's what led me to look at various systems approaches, and particularly from the world of organizational development, and as well as sort of more theoretical works, systems approaches to conflict and others, family therapy. And what really struck me was there were some real commonalities between them, that they all talked about the need to change what I would call structures, that there are big institutions, policies, that rules and regulations that shape a system, and that if you affected a society at the structural level, you would be helping to drive longer term change. But that wasn't sufficient, because you also had a very different category of attitudinal change. So you could change structures. In a company, you could change the organization chart, you could change the incentive program, the evaluation program, you could set up a new UN agency, or run, set up your U.S. Agency for International Development programs differently. But those structures aren't going to work if the attitudes, the sort of basic mental software, beliefs and norms and values of the people in the system, in those structures, if they don't change, you're not going to get systems change. So you have to begin to change that. So you could reach a peace agreement, which in a lot of ways is a structural reordering of a conflict. So you could say, okay, now rather than fighting, Hutus and Tutsis will now share power in a government. That's a structural change designed to bring peace. But if you didn't change the level of hostility and tension and mistrust between Hutus and Tutsis, those structures weren't going to make a difference. And so, we had a genocide after a peace agreement in Rwanda. And the other category is those are two big domains. They affect lots of people. They can take a very long time to change, especially in the realm of big public intergroup attitudes, culture. The one that is much more short-term focused and immediate, though, is a behavioral category, and specifically it's transactions, but transactions between key people. So if you had structures, you even started to build new attitudes, trust between ethnic groups, for example. If you had ethnic conflict entrepreneurs who were bolstering their personal leadership position by fomenting conflict between the ethnic groups, it's going to undermine the attitudinal structural change. So what came together for me was that it was those three very different domains of activity, the structural, the attitudinal, and the transactional, and that you had to affect all three of those if you were going to affect big systems change. And more specifically, that the transactional domain, it's the one that can be affected most easily in the short term, was the catalyst for structural and attitudinal change. And that those other two domains, structural can happen a little faster, but attitudinal, as I said, can be generational perhaps in some cases. So it's a dynamic interplay between the key transactions, the ability of key people to work together and either fight or solve problems. It's their ability to build structures that will reinforce the behavior and the outcomes that they want to see in the society. And then it's the attitudes that will ensure that the people in the system want to buy into those structures and buy into those outcomes. And if you can do that, then you begin to you have the makings of real structural change.